Welcome to this special broadcast from windowsontheworld.net. We are live every Sunday night, 9:30 p.m. UK time at windowsontheworld.net on the live shows page. All of our shows and our huge archive is on Odyssey. The link to our Odyssey channel is on the homepage again at windowsontheworld.net. We also have a Discord channel with many hundreds of people on there interchanging or exchanging excellent information and, in a way, interchanging, because there's a lot of information going in there which is helping people all over the place, which is what it was set up for, really. And it's a bit of a laugh as well. So, yeah, tonight we're going to be talking to Jerry Marzinski and a very special guest. We're going to be talking about the negative entities, negative voices that attack people, particularly paranoid schizophrenics. That's what it's labeled as, paranoid schizophrenia. But the psychiatric industry knows nothing about this phenomenon, and it's been on this planet as long as mankind has walked the earth. Have you ever walked down the street and had a negative thought just jump into your head from nowhere and go, where did that come from? I would never do that. Well, if that actually increases and people are abused or they have problems with drugs, it can open up the person to these entities taking hold of them. It's called demonic possession. But Jerry Marzinski, my guest tonight, and we've had him on many times before, is an expert on this subject, and he worked in the psychiatric profession for 35 years as a psychiatric practitioner. And Jerry found that the voices that were taking over people were cognitive. In other words, they weren't random hallucinations. These voices were actually able to steer the person and to take them over and to humiliate the person and generate the negative emotional energy which these entities appear to feed off. So we're going to get into a very interesting area of this tonight, but we do have an article at windowsontheworld.net, and it's called Demons Are Real. And it's on the homepage. Scroll down, it's there. There's a link to it on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. All of our shows with Jerry are on there, and an explanation of this phenomenon and a lot of information, which I think you'll find useful if you are interested in this subject. And everybody should be interested in this subject, because the mainstream media is doing exactly what these negative entities are doing to people who are unfortunate enough to be invaded by them. Okay, yeah, there's a few people in. That's great. It's much earlier than we usually do this, but this show will be on Odyssey and it will be on YouTube as well. But please subscribe on Odyssey and please subscribe on Spreaker on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net for our Sunday shows. Right, that's out of the way. I'm going to bring in Jerry and our very special guest tonight, who's going to remain anonymous. Our very special guest tonight is an engineer, and he was invaded by negative voices and was able to observe these voices. Now, I've talked about this awareness, if you have an open awareness without content, but are absolutely able to have silence, then you can monitor everything that's coming in with this awareness. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, how somebody was invaded by consistently negative voices, but was able to observe them and realize that they were not his thoughts. And that is a major step with this, to realize that what is coming into your head, these thoughts are not yours. So I'm going to bring in Jerry now and our guest. So Jerry, hi. I've just done a quick introduction to tell the people out there what we're going to be talking about tonight. I briefly introduced the subject. So would you like to start off with what you've got to say and how you got to know our special guest tonight?
Well, yeah, briefly, I want to make it clear that there is a cure for schizophrenia, and it's the voices that drive schizophrenia. If you can get rid of those voices by any means, all symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia will disappear with them. This is completely ignored by psychiatry, who say there is no cure. The only thing you can do is take their toxic meds, and they're some of the most toxic drugs in medicine today. But the voices run patterns, and they run specific repeatable patterns. Nowhere will you see anywhere where they will allow schizophrenics to speak to the public about their voices and how they operate and what they do and what they say. The psychiatry and the psychiatric mafia just say, well, they're hallucinations. They're not real, but they're very real. And after almost 40 years of working with schizophrenics, they run very set patterns. And if they run set patterns, they can't be hallucinations. So what happens with schizophrenics when they start hearing voices? There's 3 categories they fall into. They have really no choice but to try to figure out what the voices are and how to deal with them. And all of a sudden they start, hearing voices that are telling them nasty things that, they don't know where they come from. They don't know how they started. Sometimes they start slow. Sometimes they just start instantly and they're right there. But they're left with the determining what these things are. And they fall into 3 different categories. And the category that the patient chooses has everything to do with whether they're going to fully recover or not. And unfortunately, those who believe psychiatry are the ones least likely to recover. The ones who believe that the voices are hallucinations, that the only treatment is their toxic drugs. Psychiatry and psychology are real good about making up labels for different mental illnesses, but they're not any good at taking the cause and getting rid of the cause. So the ones who believe psychiatry, that these are hallucinations, their brain is broken, that they have a chemical brain imbalance or they have a genetic imbalance, all those things are not true. And they've proved it. Those are lies, but they keep perpetuating that anyway. And they avoid looking into the thought disorder, which they classified schizophrenia as being. They can't measure thoughts. They can't put them under a microscope. They can't handle them. They're not physical. The thoughts are energetic. So they kind of went, well, that's too difficult. We'll just call these thoughts hallucinations and move on to drugging the brain. But that doesn't cure anything. It makes things worse. It rots out their brains. It rots out their nervous systems. Autopsies of long-term patients who've had taken these antipsychotic drugs show that their brains are shrunken. That's the very wrong path. It's the very worst path that a schizophrenic could take. The second category are those who don't know what the voices are and are struggling. They don't think they're them, but they're not sure they're not. They're being told by psychiatry that they're hallucinations, and they're kind of like in a limbo. And the category of patients that are most likely to fully recover are those like Anon here, who have look at the voices, don't agree with them. They distance them from themselves. They realize that they are not who they are. They may not know what they are, but they know they're not who they are. And they try not to listen to them. They try to isolate them and watch what they're doing. So very seldom will we get somebody who has gone through this and has recovered pretty much on their own. Now drugs are necessary maybe to start out with, but they should not be given on a permanent basis like psychiatry is saying. They're very destructive. So I'm going to let you hear firsthand from somebody who's been through this. He's now working successfully as a mechanical engineer. He's doing fine. He's got his house paid off. He's successful, but he's going to tell his story. And I'll let you hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
That's great, Jerry. Just want to apologize to everyone for rearranging the screen because I was trying to say hi, good evening, everyone. And for some reason, my keyboard jumped and everyone moved around. So we're all in different places now, but didn't know that was going to happen. Great. So, yeah, our special guest tonight, Anon, because he's going to remain anonymous, has very kindly agreed to talk to us tonight. So, yes, just take it away.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. And I can definitely relate to much of what Jerry was talking about. Hopefully what I can say here today can help others to let them know that there is hope. You can improve your life condition. There is a cure for this. So I think the best way is to go back into a little bit my background, what got me to this point. So growing up, I was rather religious. I was actually baptized Greek Orthodox. Attended a Greek Orthodox Sunday school for a few years, probably about the age of 7 or 8 or so. Then I attended a Methodist Sunday school, probably until about the age of 9 to about 12 or 13. And then I was in a Christian youth group until about the age of 18 or so. And then I went off to college. Now, I did grow up in a rather dysfunctional family. A lot of people's situations were much worse than mine. Some were less worse. So I'll give you a little bit of idea of what I grew up in. I encountered abandonment a few times in my life. I had I guess when I was about 2, my mom had to go back to the hospital for some complications with her health that she had. So she was gone for about 2 or 3 months. And I know that I had stopped talking. I was starting to learn how to talk at that age, and I stopped talking. And I had to go to speech therapy for, I think, about the ages of 3, 4, 5, and 6 to kind of learn how to speak again. And I have 2 older brothers, an older brother and an older sister and a younger sister. Now, my older brother and older sister were from a previous marriage, and I did not know that at all growing up. I just assumed that they were my brother and sister. I didn't realize we were half siblings. So my brother was very much he got into drugs. He was definitely a narcissistic personality. And I just learned about this term narcissistic personalities in about 2015, because there were some incidents that occurred in recent family times. I was able to relate to it. So I would say that my older brother definitely has a narcissistic personality. And my older sister has a narcissistic personality as well. I would say that my older brother's narcissism was more on the bandwidth of hatred, anger, where my sister's narcissism was more on the bandwidth towards the pole of love, caring, protective. So my brother was into drugs, and he was about 9 years older than I am. And he used to think it was funny to get little kids stoned all the time. So the first time I ever smoked marijuana, I was probably about 7 years old. It was a way of bonding with him, because he thought it was funny. He would get myself, my younger sister, high sometimes to show off to his friends of what he could do, I guess. But definitely abusive in that standpoint. And growing up, I remember I would see bags of cocaine all over the place, bags of pills. I think at the age of 10, I held a brick of hash in my hand. And I remember it had the seal, like a golden elephant seal on it. So I was surrounded in drugs all the time growing up. But there was a higher voice in my head telling me, be aware of this, but don't participate. There were times I did participate, but I valued my brain. And I knew that getting into the drug scene was not going to be healthy towards my future. I like using my mind, and I knew that the drugs would dampen that effect. So I was offered cocaine several times before I was even a teenager. I always said no. I tasted it one time on my gum, same way a police officer would test it for purity. I was probably about 12 years old, I guess, approximately. And I remember it had a very sodium chemical taste. And the scientist inside me said, "Oh man, this is like baking soda. Why would I want to snort this up my nose?" So I never tried it. My older sister, when I was about the age of 7, had an affair with a high school teacher. He was married. She was 10 years younger than him. So she was kicked out of the house. So you had an 18-year-old woman having an affair with a 28-year-old high school teacher. And my dad, being from Europe, he was from Greece, he would say things like, if this happened in Greece, we'd run this person off into the mountains, type of thing. So my sister was kicked out of the house. Now, my parents did not tell me why. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what was going on. They really kept us in the dark on things. So I actually thought she had died, and nobody told me otherwise. In the meantime, with all this chaos going on, my brother decided to take advantage of the situation. He definitely would manipulate the scene whenever he could. And I do remember he was very emotionally abusive, sometimes physically abusive. I remember one time he wanted me to ride on the back of the motorcycle with him down to the trails because he wanted to get stoned and he wanted me to get high with him. And I think I don't know if I was probably between 10 to 12 at the time. And I said no because there was a higher voice in my head telling me, don't go with him. And he kind of cursed at me because I wasn't going to go with him. He wanted somebody to get stoned with. I didn't want to. I was trying to stand my own ground there. And he came back from the trails limping. The motorcycle was all broken up. And I remember he called me all sorts of vulgar names, all parts of the male and female anatomy. You little, if you were with me, this would not have happened. So he blamed me for him crashing on the motorcycle. Well, if I had gone with him, I would have been dead. So these are many things that would occur growing up in the household that I was with. And about the age of 13, my father died in my arms. He had a heart attack. I was there when he took his last breaths. I caught him as he fell and collapsed on the floor. My mom and brother were asleep at the time. They did CPR on him, but to no avail. And it was tough times. It was kind of like my whole life had changed then. I always had food on the table and a roof over my head, but sometimes that was about it. I mean, there was really no money growing up when I was in high school and my teenage years. We were really just trying to pinch pennies to do what I could to save for college and to pay for my expenses where I could. My mom had to go back to work. She had to get some training on her own to develop new job skills. So my brother, about 2 weeks after my father's death, he came home all drugged out. This is, of course, after making all the promises how we would help out, contribute to the family, do what we could to survive. And I remember I had to hide him in the garage to nurse him back to health. He couldn't even say his name. He was incoherent. My mom was probably in a state of depression all through my high school years. So I kind of became the man of the household. And there were certainly codependent relationships going on between my mother and myself and all the other family members and siblings. My brother and his coke dealings actually started doing most of the coke that he was supposed to be dealing. So he got in trouble with the mafia. He owed them about $4,000 or $5,000, didn't have the money to pay it. So he had to stop making car payments on his car. So his car got repossessed and he used the money to pay off the mob for the cocaine that he had self-snorted. Well, I guess it was better to have your car repossessed than have your kneecaps broken. So he probably made the right decision on that. So these are some of the stories of what I grew up with. Now, on the other hand, going back to when I first had consciousness, I'd say about 3 or 4 year old child, I was attending the Greek Orthodox Church, going to Sunday school. I didn't speak barely any Greek. And we're learning about this guy called Jesus. And, who is this Jesus guy? So I took it upon myself that, maybe this is something that we're supposed to emulate, to be like. So I kind of developed having a divine mission to do what I can to improve humanity, to kind of be, a Messiah quest. And that kind of became the archetype of my personality. Now, growing up in all these family dynamics, the dysfunctionality that was going on, I didn't have a chance to explore that. I mean, with my dad dying when I was in 8th grade at the age of 13, it became survival. Trying to keep the house going, trying to do what I could to help out. I was always working on the house, working on the cars. That's probably why I went into mechanical engineering, because it was survival. I had to learn how to fix light switches, repair the car when it broke. And for any motorheads out there, I was adjusting points at probably about the age of 12 on a distributor, for those that know what I'm talking about. So there's a lot of dysfunction growing up in my family. And the thing about coming from a dysfunctional family is the other members aren't aware of what was going on. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to face it themselves. And you don't realize how dysfunctional your family is until you get out of it and you're able to look back on things. Now, I'd be able to forgive all of them, but I have to keep a lot of my siblings and my mother at a safe emotional and geographical distance just to keep my own sanity. But I have a pretty good relationship with these days. I just know how far to tread on certain things. So what had happened is I got out of college and I majored in mechanical engineering. I had taken psychology courses as well. I took a general psychology, comparative psychology, and abnormal psychology. So I was very aware of the DSM manuals, the classifications of various abnormal psychology disorders. So when I got out of college, what was happening? It was almost like my emotions were waking up that had been so suppressed as a child and growing up in my teenage years and what was going on and everything. I guess a lot of suppressed anger was coming out. And I remember I started going through permutations of like the philosopher in me was waking up. Like I was trying to determine how the universe works. I kept finding myself going into these certain patterns of thought. And I came to this conclusion that the universe works by interplay of opposites. I kept seeing circles and triangles wherever I looked. And I've come to understand that that's referred to as sacred geometry, understanding those patterns. It was almost like I was seeing the matrix in action in the way that the universe works. And other things were occurring because it was almost like the person that I was trying to be who I couldn't explore as a teenager because my whole personality and psyche was suppressed from the family dynamics that were going on, was waking up. So I got out of college and I had a job for a while and just things started happening. some very intense negative emotions started to occur, where I was starting to feel extreme guilt for my existence. I started going to the point of being suicidal, and I was crashing is a good way of describing things. I started to see, I couldn't see colors anymore. I mean, I got so depressed. You could call it, it's a whole combination of things. I know DSM tries to categorize certain psychological conditions, but that's not accurate because you're going through so many different bandwidths at the same time. Sometimes you can be manic, bipolar, in a depression, schizophrenic, all schizophrenic all at the same time. And I remember food lost all flavor. I was seeing in black and white. I was about 6'2" at the time. I was probably below 100 pounds, and I was crashing mentally, psychologically. A lot of things going on. There was still codependent abuse going on from my mother, back and forth. So I was put on lithium, but I couldn't even remember when to take it or not take it. And it's almost like I was encountering these very strong thoughts. I'll call them very, very, very strong thoughts. It's a good way of describing it. But I had a mechanical engineering degree, and I reached the point where I could not even think how to add or subtract numbers. It's like I was so overwhelmed by what was going on in my head, awakening other thoughts. Sometimes it was manic. Sometimes it was very almost like slow motion, like time distortions were going on. And finally, I crashed so hard, it was almost like I felt like I was no longer sleeping at all anymore. So my sister and my mom, they brought me to Princeton House, which is a psychiatric hospital in Princeton, New Jersey. I was there for about 4 weeks in the fall of 1990, all of September 1990. And what had happened is I reached the point of like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I felt like I had failed in my divine mission to save humanity. Now, I know that sounds ludicrous, but I'll get more into that as we go on. So these very strong thoughts were telling me that you failed. You're done. You failed in your mission. Give it up.
Okay. And these were intrusive thoughts.
Oh, absolutely.
They just barged, but they sounded like your own thoughts, but the intent was very different.
Yes. At this time, they were sounding like my own thoughts, by all means. And that's why I had almost going to the split mind type of state where I was the participant dealing with all these thoughts. The other part of my psyche was the scientist or the observer watching what was going on.
So there was a distance between those intrusive thoughts and your identity of yourself.
I would say there was a distance, but it was a fight to maintain that distance.
Yes.
It definitely was a battle. So finally, I reached a point where I totally crashed. I was committed to the psychiatric ward. And I remember that they tried all different types of drugs to snap me out of things. And you're like it's like a guinea pig because they don't know what's going on.
No, they just circulate. If one drug doesn't work, they try another one. It's there's no rhyme or reason to it other than their judgment.
It's trial and error. Is really
trial and error.
What they're doing when they're in there. So none of the drugs were snapping me out of it. I mean, I was rock bottom. But I remember being in the hospital, and there was about a time for about 48 hours where I felt like I wasn't sleeping, where I actually started to hear voices. Now, I separate hallucinations, different than what Jerry does. I separate the hallucinations into 3 different categories. One is audible hallucinations, where you feel like you're actually hearing a different voice. The other is what I call visual hallucinations, where you're actually seeing something. And the third I will call the very, very strong thoughts. And those very strong thoughts, it's kind of your own voice, but it was almost like a battle between my subconscious and my conscious mind going on. It's still it's made to sound like your voice, but it doesn't really feel like it is you talking.
And the intent is different with regard to the information.
Yes.
Now, were you hearing these voices inside your head or outside your head?
When I was, the very strong thoughts were certainly inside my head, but when I started hearing auditory hallucinations, that I'd say was outside my head, where it was almost like a voice in my ear.
Yeah, that's when they get strong and they're not worried about, they go up, move outside, and that makes them even more terrifying.
I mean, I think they were frustrated because they weren't winning with me, I guess.
Yeah, they weren't able to take you completely over.
They were getting frustrated. As I was going through this, there were times where it felt like something else was in my body. I mean, my arms were thrashing back and forth. I couldn't control them. I remember being in the psychiatric hospital. I would be walking along. I would walk straight into a wall. I would just keep walking up against the wall. I remember laughing, thinking how stupid this looks, but I couldn't find the thoughts to stop myself from walking into the wall. Like something else was doing it for me. So when in the psychiatric hospital, what about those 48 hours of hearing, these were audible hallucinations where I was hearing voices. It was like a cacophony of voices. And I explained to Jerry, it's almost like being in a movie theater or play before the show actually starts. You have all these conversations going on of different people, women's voices, men's voices, children speaking, but you don't really know what they're saying. That's kind of how I interpret it. Like there's all these voices going on, but I wasn't really paying attention or listening to what they were saying. I viewed it, this is not me. This is something else going on. They could have been talking about me. It could have just been babble, but I didn't take it that this was something that was necessarily me talking.
Yep. And that was your saving grace.
We all have, sometimes before you fall asleep, you might have an auditory hallucination where you hear a voice just before you're about to fall asleep sometimes. I think we've all gone through that. To stay in the hospital, when I was there, 48 hours, I was hearing those voices constantly, like that audible hallucinations. And I remember being in the lying in my room, and some of the nurses that were terrific. They really were trying to help you. Others, well, they may have good intentions, but it was not helpful. I think as a patient in the hospital, you just want a little compassion and kindness is really the biggest thing that I think I was looking for at the time. But I remember I kept telling, look, I'm not sleeping. I said, I'm not sleeping at all during my nights here. And they kept saying, well, yeah, we saw you. Your eyes were closed. And I said, look, just because my eyes were closed does not mean I was sleeping. And I was trying to explain that to them. So nothing was working. There's lots of stories about what went on in the hospital psychiatric ward. I think the psychiatrist they assigned to me was trying to snap me out of it with anger therapy, where he would act very angry at me. And I think that's one of the other things with these attacks, where sometimes they don't just attack their target in their mind. They will actually go into other people around their target and attack them as well. So that's why I think sometimes where schizophrenic patients may go after other people because they see they're sensing the archons and other people going after them. And I've encountered that too, where it's not just in me, they're taking control of somebody else around you to play with you, to manipulate you a little bit.
I've heard that a number of times, and the assault rate on psychiatrists is higher than for any other doctor. I mean, they're assaulted more than any other kind of doctor.
So towards the end of my stay, it was in the final week in September of 1990. They didn't know how to snap me out of it. I wasn't sure if I was going to be permanently committed to a psychiatric ward, and the other option sent me over to the state ward. And I heard rumors that once you're in there, you don't get out. So they finally resorted to ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. That's where they put you in anesthesia to relax your muscles. They put electrodes on your head and basically shock your brain a little bit. Now, it's not like the way you see in the 1940s, 1950s movies where you're shaking all over the place, because they do give you a muscle relaxation anesthesia. So I went through a total of 6 ECT treatments. But I'll tell you, after the very first one, I felt better. It had basically it lifted the needle out of the broken record that kept telling me that I was a failure in life, give it up, that I failed on my mission. So I was flat. I was like, okay, those strong thoughts have stopped now. So they did 5 more sessions. 4 of the sessions were outpatient therapy.
And I've heard that shock does drive the voices away temporarily.
It was definitely from a temporary standpoint, because I got out of the psychiatric hospital. I was assigned a counselor, and I guess a psychiatrist actually prescribed the drugs. So they put me on Klonopin, which I understand is a mood stabilizer, and I was getting counseling at the time. Now, with my counselor, I was really more talking about the relationship with my mother, trying to break that codependency and everything. I wasn't telling my counselor everything that was going on. Because a lot of times they would ask you things like, are you hearing voices? And I didn't want to say yes.
Yeah, because they drug it more.
I didn't want to be back on drugs. I didn't want to be back in that psychiatric ward. I knew this was a battle that I had to fight myself. I had to use my own mind. It was a spiritual battle.
Yes.
Now, during this time period, I stayed away from all drugs. I didn't touch alcohol. I didn't touch marijuana or anything, because I knew my mind was not stable. I didn't trust myself, and I knew I got to get through this on my own. And I was not taking a lot of drugs at all growing up. Yeah, sure, I smoked a little pot here in high school and weekends sometimes, but I stopped at times because I realized I could tell it was changing my personality and those around me that were smoking the marijuana a little bit. So I would not have been able to get through a mechanical engineering curriculum if I was doing a lot of drugs. I'll tell you that much, because you really need to have a focused mind to be able to do the formulas and the calculations and everything. So I was very aware of the drug scene. I mean, I knew what centimillion was by the age of 9. I knew Hawaiian gold and all the different drug terms out there. But I was living this double life because here I was, kind of a B plus A student in high school and elementary school and middle school. Yet I knew where to get drugs within 24 hours anywhere in town and anything anybody wanted. So I was living this dual life where I was kind of on the academic path, but at the same time, drugs were all around me. And my mom was kind of oblivious to what was going on. I mean, she had a family to try and take care of. My father had passed away, so she was dealing with all that sort of thing. So jumping back to fall of 1990, I was out of the psychiatric ward.
That's after 4 weeks, right?
It's after 4 weeks. And I started going to counseling. And then the voice, the thoughts got very, very, very strong. It was almost like I was facing a tribunal, a court, where I was being judged and all of humanity was being judged. I was almost like acting as a representative for humanity. And I remember the first trial, the very strong voice was offering me mammon, a path to riches, power, and wealth very easily if I gave up my quest. It was basically saying, hey, if you give up this quest that you're pursuing, we'll give you all this. And I was actually shown a path in my mind of to power, money, wealth, fame, instantaneously. And I was in a huge, broken and fragmented state. I was unemployed. I was going into debt. I was basically paying for my health insurance, any rent with cash advances on some credit cards that I had. I was unemployed. This would have been 1990. It was a tail end of, we were mid-recession in the United States at that point in time. So there were really that many jobs out there. So I went through that first tribunal or test where was I going to accept the path to wealth, power, fame, and fortune? And I said no.
I've heard that before too. I think, if I'm not mistaken, James Taylor agreed to that, the musician, and he got his wealth and power and that kind. So yeah, I've heard of that before, where they offer you to try to buy you off.
They're trying to bribe you, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm thinking, boy, this is madness. I mean, this is exactly what Jesus Christ allegedly went through, on his 40 days in the desert. And I'm thinking, boy, my mind is really playing tricks on me. Here it is. I had this kind of sort of, I guess, a Messiah complex, so to speak. And here it is. I have these voices offering me wealth, fame, power. So I turned them down, and it was tough. It was tempting.
Well, you did better than the friggin' politicians are doing right now.
Yeah, if you sell your soul, though, you got to be able to look yourself in the mirror, and I want to be able to look myself in the mirror. So there was a series of assaults by these voices. I mean, they were telling me how worthless I was. Go kill yourself.
And that's common.
And they would come with such elaborate schemes. Like the very strongest thing they wanted me to do was climb up a high tension electrical tower and jump onto the live voltage wires, and just hang and let your body become electrocuted and fuse up there, almost for dramatic effect. The other one was the common thing of carbon monoxide poisoning by hooking up a pipe to your car exhaust and doing it in the garage. And there were times I actually went in my garage and started getting the pipes ready to do that. I mean, I came that close to doing it.
See, one thing interesting is that the voices turn against the survival instinct of people. People's natural instinct is to survive, and their thinking is usually centered around surviving or improving their situation, but not with the voices. It's totally opposite. It turns on the survival of the individual and sabotages them, puts them in a much worse place. So it's just opposite of what nature intended for us.
And we all have negative thoughts. That's normal. But what these, you can call them archons or demons or exterior voices, what they do is they take any negative thoughts that you have and they amplify them exponentially. And that's the battle, trying to figure, wait, these are extreme thoughts. These aren't just like normal, typical, minute negative thoughts. These are extremes where it takes you to.
And they demand your attention.
And I think what prevented me from committing suicide at the time was really, I didn't care what anybody older than me, but I had two nieces. And I remember I kept thinking, what would that do to them if their uncle killed himself? And I remember, it would give them a permission slip to do the same thing if they encounter a tough time in life. So what happened? I still had an ounce of compassion inside of me not to do it for their sake. But that's the only thing that saved me, because everything else would not have done. But just the fact that I had two younger members in my family, two nieces, and I just felt like it would devastate them. That's probably what stopped me from committing suicide. So little do they know, they actually saved my life just by their existence.
Yeah, and the suicide rate for schizophrenics is 3 to 5 times that of the normal population, it's exactly the same as psychiatrists.
So I went through some of the negative thoughts. For example, one was making me feel extreme guilt, and they will pry into your memories. I used to go fishing like most people do sometimes, and you take an earthworm, you put the hook into it to bait the fish. And those thoughts made me feel so guilty for killing an earthworm. Like, who do you think you are to take life like that? You are worthless. You are evil. You are a terrible person. Oh, believe me, I felt so guilty for killing that earthworm. I still do to this day to some extent.
Now, after these attacks, did you feel drained energetically and emotionally?
Oh, I was exhausted. I couldn't get out of bed sometimes.
So these voices are actually draining these individuals. So what they're after is the generation of the negative emotional energy, which they feed off of. That's what their food is. So they're using these people as like we use cattle. They set them out, they eat food, they generate this energy, but they can't make this energy themselves. They can't. They need negative emotional energy. They can't eat positive energy. So they actually, I've had numerous patients tell me they could feel their energy being pulled and drained.
Now, I don't know if they're feeding or if they're addicted to it. I don't know if it's a food or a drug to them. I'm still out on that one, because they may be addicted to it in a sense, the same way we have addicts in our own material world. You could have addicts in the spiritual realms as well. So it may be food, it may be a drug for them. I'm not quite sure on that one.
No, that's interesting.
So let me see. Oh yeah, so it may be guilt for any piece of meat that I ever ate in my life, any piece of chicken or beef that I killed another animal. How could you? You're worthless. You think you're a good human being. You're a terrible human being for doing that. I still deal with some of those thoughts to these days too. But I would confront these voices. I would battle them. I would say, okay, you're saying I'm a horrible human being for eating the meat of animals and killing a live animal, or having a live animal being killed for my sustenance. And I said, well, God gave me teeth, mouth, and taste buds. Do I not have the right to use them? Don't attack me. Take your accusations to God. I didn't create myself. One of the very strong thoughts kept saying, how worthless you and humanity are. You're just mounds of flesh destined to rot, being eaten by worms when you die. And I argue with that one pretty strongly. I said, look, I didn't determine the form of my being. God did. Take your arguments to God, not to me. That thought stopped pretty quickly. And I almost felt like it knew that I had a very strong case and it wasn't going to win that one. So then they've gone to other ones. So this went on for quite a while. Probably throughout 1990, the winter, spring of 1991, these went on. And I was still seeing counseling at this time. I was dealing with more issues with my mother. I didn't go into any of the other stuff because, like I said, I didn't want to go back in the hospital. I didn't want to be on additional drugs. I wanted to fight this on my own. I hated being on Klonopin. And I was in definite cathonic territory. I mean, I was going through hell. It really was what was going on. Excuse me. So I recently talked to one of my best friends who was around me when this was occurring, because I wanted to hear what his view was, an outside person, on what was occurring. And he said, there's 3 distinct things that I remember. I came on the back porch to talk with you while you're going through this. It was like you were there, you were talking clearly and fluently, and all of a sudden you would just kind of go, like you were slurring your words, like you couldn't get the words out. It was almost like, And he said, what really shocked him was your mother, just the lack of compassion that she had. She was out there saying, "Oh, just stop it. He's just faking. Stop it. Stop faking that." And my friend said to me, he said, he said, that wasn't your personality. You weren't one to do something like that for attention. And your mom kept saying, "Oh, he's just doing it for attention." So I had this conversation with my friend probably within the past 2 months or so, and he was giving me from what he remembered. And he said, "I came over to try and get you out of the house." He said, you just didn't want to come out. You just wanted to stay isolated and stay away from everybody." And he said he kept having to argue with me to get me to just go play some basketball. He said, "Come on, let's go play basketball. Let's go play basketball." And he said it took like a half hour of coaxing. And finally he got me to go out. And he said, we went out, we shot hoops for about an hour or so. And he said, he remembered at the end of it that I had thanked him for that. He said, "This was really good. I thank you for getting me out. I needed to do this." Because it takes your mind off of the archonic attacks because you're doing something else.
Yeah, and the voices want you to isolate. I mean, they want you away from everybody, so there's no interference with what they're trying to do.
And they do that by making you feel so worthless. Like, who's going to love you? Who's going to talk to you? Who wants to deal with you? You're a worthless human being. You have no value. Don't even bother. They are so above you. I mean, all these things go on.
And that's common. That's part of the patterns that these things run. And they run it with, hundreds of schizophrenics I've talked to run through these same patterns. You're no good. You're worthless. You're stupid. And all the way down the line. It's like they were all made in the same factory and programmed the same way to say the same kinds of things to people who are schizophrenic.
And I remember started attacking remember I mentioned that I felt like I had some sort of a divine mission to do what I can to improve the human condition, to help humanity where I could. One of the attacks kept coming on. Why even bother? Nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody's going to believe you. Nobody's going to believe that you're having these attacks. Who's going to believe you? You're just a fool. Why do you choose to be the fool? And I basically said to them, "Yeah, I may be a fool, but still I have to try." And they said, "Why do you have to try?" And I said, "For the love of humanity." And they just said, "Idiot." This stuff would go on quite frequently during 1991.
Yeah, and they tell a lot of patients, if you tell anybody about us, they're going to just lock you up and fill you full of drugs. Nobody's going to believe what you say.
And I felt at the same time I was being exposed to something higher up, like there was a different knowledge coming into me. Some people refer to this as the Akashic records. There's a whole other universe out there other than just the material realms. And this is from a mechanical engineer telling you has a very logic, scientific mind. But I've encountered this stuff, and I have to apply logic to come to terms with it. So finally, I reached a point, and it probably was fall of 1991. So this is a year after being out of the psychiatric hospital, going through counseling and everything else, where there's nothing left in my psyche. I was bombarded so much with these thoughts. I was completely drained. I was dead inside. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I started to pray to God that give me a sign. If I truly have some sort of mission in life, that I'm not just mentally ill here, give me a sign that there's more to this madness in my head. I didn't care what it was. I didn't know what the sign was. I let it up to God to decide what the sign would be. It could have been a Bible levitating on the table or some priest knocking at the door. It could have been anything. I didn't care. I just said, if you want me to go on in life, I need to know that this is not just all madness in my head, that there's something more, I'd say, divine to what's going on here. This truly is a spiritual battle. I need to know. So I prayed and prayed about 2 weeks very intensely. And then one night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would say these thoughts become so strong between about 2 to 4 a.m. in the morning. Sometimes around 3 a.m. You'll wake up and they'll be attacking you. Like
Yeah,
you're sleeping
and that's
fine.
common.
You're sleeping fine. You wake up and it's like this bombardment of these negative thoughts. So I woke about 2 a.m. in the morning after intense praying to God for some sort of sign that there's more of this madness in my head. I woke up about 2 a.m. with the feeling that there was a presence in my room. I looked up at the ceiling, and all of a sudden I started to see this like illuminated fog or smoke coming into the room. Now it was occurring about maybe a foot or two below the ceiling. And at first I thought it was, oh great, there's a fire in my light, my ceiling light. But I was like, wait a second. Usually if there's fire, you see like browning of the surface. I didn't see any browning or burning going on. It was just this illuminated fog, like a dark smoke coming in, and it started to fill more and more. And I remember I closed my eyes and I shook my head a few times to try and snap out of it. To think, oh great, I'm hallucinating now. Great, I was hearing voices in my head. Now I'm having a visual hallucination. And the smoke kept pouring in, and I saw this portal open up. It was oval shaped, vertical, very dark. I couldn't see into it. And all of a sudden, swoosh, I see this serpentine tail move up in that portal. Now, it wasn't like a single snake. It was almost like two snake-like tails connected to each other, adjacent to each other. So it didn't quite have a structure of a snake, since it looked like there could have been two vertebrae in there. I wasn't really sure. I was like, whoa, what is going on here?
Now, do you still have the picture of that? You sent me a picture of that.
Yes. Well, actually, let me explain more what I saw, and then I'll show the audience the picture. So the fog's filling up the room above my head. And then all of a sudden, I see the snake-like thing come out of that portal, and it's into the fog. It's like I'm seeing snake movements among the fog. And all of a sudden, this face starts to form out of the fog and go across my field of vision from left to right. And it had like a dog lion-like face from the side with a serpentine body. And I remember thinking, well, if I am having a visual hallucination, this is really weird. I mean, why this? This makes no sense. And the snake-like creature with the head of a dog-like, lion-like face, so it was sideways. Then it turned towards me and faced me. And when it faced me, I could see it almost looked like a beat-up lion is a good way of describing it, like a mangy cat. And its left eye looked like it was slightly scratched out, almost like it had been in a cat fights. It might even have been blind in one eye, for all I know, the way it looked. And I remember I could see stubble on its face. I mean, I could see whiskers. And it's coming at me. And I'm feeling intense fear inside. I'm like, this thing's trying to terrify me, whatever this is. And I'm thinking, is this the end of my existence? Is this a hallucination, or is this really something from a different realm coming to destroy me? So as this lion-like face is coming at me, all of a sudden it changes into the most horrible looking face. It became like a hobgoblin, a withering hag or old man of decay. Just as terrifying as possible. And it was coming at me almost like the howling expression, like it was going to devour me. And I had nothing left. I had no energy in me. I had nothing left in my psyche. I knew fighting it would have been pointless. This thing, or whatever it was way more powerful than I was. So instead of remaining in a state of fright and terror, I lowered my ego and I just bombarded it with love. That was the only thing I had left in me that I could fight with.
It's the best thing you could have done.
So I threw love at this entity. All of a sudden, it pulverized. It disappeared. It was gone. I'm like, okay, I'm still here. It didn't destroy me. And I look up, and there's a different face looking at me now. It's like a white porcelain mask with kind of golden-like wing, silky-like strands flowing out of it. It was almost like wings fluttering, but the wings were like coming in and out of existence. It was almost like a being of consciousness that put on this mask for my sake so I could see it. At least that's the way I was sort of interpreting it. Now this new white face that was before me, it was almost like it didn't realize that it was there or that I was there. And I remember it kind of looked at me, and we both looked at each other about 10 or 15 seconds, and it felt like an eternity. But this whitest mask was androgynous. I couldn't tell if it was like either male or female, but I definitely sensed it was of a feminine nature. So we're staring at each other, and I remember this thinking, this is too beautiful. I am not worthy to look at this face. It was the most beautiful face I ever saw in my entire life. And part of me wanted me to look away because I'm thinking, I'm not worthy to look at this. This is something from beyond. This is from the divine realms. I shouldn't be seeing this. And the face looked at me. And then all of a sudden it smiles at me. But it wasn't just a smile. It was like a flirtatious come hither and join me. And I remember in the face, I even saw dimples form in the face as it smiled at me. And as this was occurring, a huge wave of love, joy, erotic and ecstatic bliss came from this face that was looking at me and overwhelmed me. It was the most greatest feeling of joy, bliss, ecstatic. It was erotic, not in the physical sexual sense, but erotica in the sense of uniting with another being or creature. And I remember I started having what we call an out-of-body experience. I was floating out of my body, merging with this beautiful white face that was before me. And I remember it seemed to have pupilless eyes. It might have been dark pupilless eyes, from what I recall. And I was merging with this entity, and I was going into that portal that had formed earlier in the evening, or in the night, I should say. And just as I was going to the portal and merging with this entity at the same time, I fell back asleep. So I don't remember anything upon entering that portal. I woke up the next morning in a state of shock, religious shock. I'm like, what just happened? What was that? But you know what that told me? It told me that it was not madness in my head. It told me that these divine realms are real. And part of those negative thoughts that kept battling, kept telling me that there's no such thing as God. Give it up. God doesn't exist.
That's one thing they always say.
And the fact that I had this vision meant that all the madness in my head was not madness. It was a spiritual battle. There was something legitimate going on.
Exactly.
And I didn't quite know how to describe it. I didn't tell anybody about this because I didn't want them locking me up, putting me on more drugs. I didn't want to go to my counselor. Yeah, I had a hallucination the other night. Because I didn't want them to put me on drugs. And this hallucination, or vision as I'll call it, was the only thing holding me together at this point. Because it gave me the footing. It stopped my free fall, falling into hell, or Hades, you might say, into chthonic territory. It gave me a footing to start rebuilding myself. It gave me purpose again. So that vision saved my life. Now, I don't know if the entities were both the same entity. The interpretation of what occurred is difficult. And I wish I had a video camera or digital camera in the room at the time to record what would happen, because I don't know if this was unique to my mind only, or if there was actually something that could be captured on film or digital media.
No, that was energetic stuff. Yeah, I don't think you'd be able to capture that. Maybe the smoke. Now, Sherry talked about that same kind of smoke, but you had a real interesting twist. Not only did you see the smoke, but you saw this figure in there that you had a picture of. And then you said that you did some research on it, and that same figure existed, what, hundreds of years ago?
Yes, actually. May I do a share screen, Mark?
You could probably just hold it up to the camera.
Yeah,
Well,
actually, no, because we'd have had to put it in before the show to do that. So
okay.
Can you hold the image up to the camera?
That's right. Yeah, I'll get out of here again.
I can't because it's a digital image. I don't actually have a hard
okay.
copy, but I can tell the audience what it looks like. It's the image of Chernubis, which is an Egyptian god, and it's also known as the Gnostic demiurge or Abraxas. If your audience types in Chernubis, it's spelled Chnoubis. Just do a Google search on that and look at the images. So, Mark, you can even do that as well. It's Chnoubis. That's exactly what I saw. It's almost like a lion, dog-like face with a serpentine tail.
So this was interesting that it didn't just exist in your head. It existed historically well before you saw it.
Correct. And keep in mind, when I had these experiences, that visual hallucination or vision, I'll call it, that was fall of 1991. There was no internet back then. I wasn't reading any occult books. The only thing I was reading very heavily at the time was the Bible, because I finally had some time in my life to kind of read it on my own. I wanted to kind of read through the Bible to see what I felt it said, rather than just what I learned in Sunday school. And then in recent years, I've learned of Gnosticism. I didn't know what Gnosticism was back then.
So you weren't even aware that this thing existed anywhere before you saw it.
Correct. Because like I said, it looks strange. I'm like, this is a weird thing to hallucinate. Why would I see something like this? Okay, if I was praying to God for a sign, okay, if I saw that bearded guy holding lightning bolts, okay, maybe that's a self hallucination. If I had seen an angel with like the typical angel that you see with a white robe and the wings flapping, okay, but this is something I'd never seen before. I had no point of reference to base it off of. I've never seen it in a book before. I never read about it or anything like that. I know Carl Jung talks about this as being abraxas, the combination of dualities, and there's a lot of various perspectives on this according to the Gnostic viewpoints. And I just learned of Gnosticism maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. But so much what I went through was very, very, very similar to what they call the Gnostic experiences. And like I said, I grew up on an Orthodox path. I was Greek Orthodox, Methodist, Catholic for a while. They don't teach you about this thing called the Demiurge or Abraxas in any of those books. And that's where all these synchronicities are coming to place. I'm reading about this stuff. I'm like, wow, I went through this stuff. I understand it. And I did it without being on the drugs. Now, I was on Klonopin for about 1.5 years after being in the psychiatric hospital. So I was probably off the Klonopin by 1992, I would say. So this all happened when I was about the age of 24, 25, 26. I am now 55. And last time I had to take any drugs for this condition was probably when I was 26 or 27.
So there is a cure, and it has to do with beating back these voices, which strive to take the person over, and keeping them at a distance and not allowing them to see your thoughts are not your thoughts. You're the one who's looking at those thoughts. You're the one who's listening to those thoughts. You are not your thoughts. And that's what people are taught from the time they're kids. So when a schizophrenic starts having these intrusive thoughts that sound just like their own thoughts, they believe, well, this is me. And that's what these things want you to think. And I've had several schizophrenics ask the voices, who are you? What are you? And they'd say, we are you. That's what they want you to believe. And psychiatry wants you to believe that your brain is broken and to take these toxic drugs. So either way is a bad path. The way you went is the way to go.
If someone's dealing with this, view it as a spiritual battle, because
it is a spiritual battle.
That's truly what it is. My counselor put down the diagnosis as affective schizophrenic disorder, and I asked my counselor at the time. I said, "Am I schizophrenic?" And she said, "No, but I have to put down a code for insurance purposes." Now, I don't know if she was saying that just to be nice or that.
No, that's the truth. That's the truth. That's where all those diagnoses came from. They were all made up, every single one of them. There is not a clinical test to test any single one of the, 256 diagnoses psychiatry have come up with. And then the drug companies come up behind them and fabricate all these toxic chemicals to treat the symptoms, but they don't go after the cause.
They mask the cause, and being on those prescription drugs for a temporary time period, that I can understand, because that's just going to get you over. But for the long term, that's not going to improve you. It's going to make it even worse.
No, it's going to destroy your brain.
So here I am today. I'm well established. I've got a wonderful wife, a child, a dog, a house, a car. I'm an established mechanical engineer. I've had a building inspector's, fire inspector's license. So to all those who are dealing with this thing, there is hope. You have to view it as a spiritual battle, though. So I just say, get the right counselor. Even a Jungian psychiatrist would be good, because Carl Jung's stream of thought seems to understand this more so than some of the others. That what you're going through is real, and you have some of the psychiatric establishment says it's not real, it's just in your head. Well, it's real, but it just happens to be occurring in your head.
And do not believe the psychiatric mafia that once you got it, it's a lifetime sentence. Do not believe that. It's a lie.
Now, the idea of that beautiful face that I saw, if you go back and take a Gnostic approach to this, that could have been Sophia Barbelo, as they call it, could have been an Eon, and it's trying to interpret what had happened. So I don't know if both those entities were the same, like the one with the lion-like face, and then the beautiful one afterwards, if they were the same.
No, I don't think so. My gut feel is they're not.
because the second one was very different feel. And I don't know if we're getting some feedback.
Sounds
Oh,
like
I'm
your
sorry.
phone.
I'm sorry. That's my phone. Just emergency alert.
Yeah, I think this idea of the collective unconscious, the Jungian thing, there's something in it. I mean, these archetypes do seem to be there, and maybe they're part of the ongoing evolution of consciousness, the collective consciousness. I don't go a lot in for Jungian stuff, but I think these archetypes are real because they have been described by many different people, and then they become part of the psyche. I've actually seen a negative side of that, and then I suppose you have to put a name on it, because what I saw I would actually associate with Lilith, but if I'd never seen Lilith before, I would have thought it was a dark Asian woman who I'd seen actually appear on somebody's face, who I think had been taken over by this entity, and it actually appeared in front of me. So yeah, I think there's a massive area to go into there, and I think we've covered a lot tonight. It's a very interesting story, which I'm going to listen to again and try and pull some things out of that for future reference. Is there anything that you want to say in conclusion, Jerry? And then we'll bring it back to Anon.
Yeah, kind of two things. One is you hit it right on the head that they hate the human race. They hate babies. They hate families. They go to destroy families. They go to destroy the individual. They have no love for the human race. It's just like what the politicians are doing right now.
Well, it's the same as the Global Action Plan. Yes.
Yeah. And the only other thing is, like, if you want to know more about the voices, take a look at this book here. It talks all about what they are, how they operate.
That's Jerry's book, which is available at jerrymarzinski.com.
Yeah, you can get it off our website.
Now, if I could do a little plug, I did write a book about some of my experiences.
I'll get off here so people can see.
It's Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10. And my website is asteroxrising.com. If you go to the website asteroxrising.com, that's spelled asteroxrising.com. That'll explain everything about the book, a little bit about my background. And the book goes into some of my experiences that I went through, but it's more about a road path for others on their journey to kind of help find your own soul and to find your spiritual path. It's a lengthy read. It took me about 3 decades to write, but I felt like it was my higher self or my Damien that was kind of guiding me on this method. And I'm a mechanical engineer, and most people know that engineers can't write. So the fact that I was able to put something out tells you something. There's something more profound going on here.
Well, maybe we should have another show and go into some of that stuff, because I think at the moment what I'm trying to do is, with these live streams, go into really interesting conversations which actually spark up important information. And I think we could do that in the future.
I'd definitely be receptive to that. I'd like to show some of the images of what I saw, and we can talk more about.
I'd really like to go over that in more detail, because tonight, obviously, I wanted you to lay out what your experience was, so I stayed out of it, and I think it flowed really well. Everyone's really enjoyed it. It's a bit early usually for Windows on the World, but this will be here for posterity.
Excellent.
And it's on Odyssey as well. So please jump from YouTube to Odyssey, everybody. I put an interview with Barbara McKenzie there last week, all about the Global Action Plan, how it affects New Zealand and her experiences of it, and how it ties into our research and what is actually going on. So Odyssey is the place to be. So please subscribe to us on there, and we will be putting up trailers on YouTube, as we have been for months, and they will lead you to Odyssey and to our live shows page at Windows on the World. So I think that was a great show. I wanted to keep this short because obviously we want it to migrate to our other platform. But I'd like to thank you very much for those insights there, Anon, and we can carry on this conversation in the future. And I hope this is helpful to people. I think we've gone into a very different area tonight, and that's what we wanted to do with these conversations. But basically, I think the key to all this is awareness. Awareness is of what is actually coming into your mind and where it's coming from and where the thoughts come from. So we've got into some fascinating stuff tonight, and thanks everyone for listening. And yes, see you soon on Windows on the World live show every Sunday, 9:30 p.m. and look out for the live streams during the week. Thanks a lot, everybody.